The night my husband told 11 people I was only good for paying bills, I didn't say a word. I picked up my fork and I counted. 4 people laughed. 5 looked away. 1 laughed the loudest, tossing her locks back like it was the best thing she'd heard all year. I already knew her name. 3 days later, I was sitting in my car, in a parking garage on Peachtree engine, off phone in my hand. 1 name in my contacts. I dialed it. 2 rings. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask what I meant. Derek was home thinking I was still sulking about a dinner. He had no idea the dinner was already over. Before we go any further, what time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. Atlanta in late October has a particular kind of evening light amber and low cutting through the glass towers on Peachtree, like the city itself is showing off. I used to love driving home in it. Windows down, music off, just the hum of the highway, and the feeling that I had built something real. I had built something real. That part wasn't an illusion. My name is Madelyn Carter Hines. Hines is my maiden name. Most people in my personal life know me as Madelyn Carter, Derek's wife, the woman who keeps the household running, the one who remembers the insurance renewals and the HOA dues and the name of his mother's cardiologist. That version of me is accurate. She's just not complete. The complete version has a different signature. On 14 separate investment documents spanning 9 years, I signed as M. Hines. Chief Financial Officer, then silent partner, then quietly, incrementally, with the kind of patience that only comes from doing math. No one else is checking minority shareholdery in 3 companies across the Atlanta metro area. One of them was a mid-size construction firm headquartered off Northside Drive. Derek founded that firm 11 years ago with 2 trucks and a line of credit his uncle co-signed. By the time we got married, it had 17 employees and a regional reputation. By the time he humiliated me at Bones Restaurant on my 38th birthday, it had 340 employees, 4 active commercial contracts worth a combined $61 million, and a shareholder structure that Derek had not reviewed in 4 years because his CFO, a man named Trent, who played golf with Derek every other Saturday, had told him everything was fine. Everything was fine, technically. Trent just hadn't mentioned that M. Hines had been quietly acquiring shares through a series of small secondary purchases over 6 years. Nothing hostile, nothing illegal. Just a woman paying attention while her husband stopped paying attention to her. We met at a fundraiser for a charter school in Midtown. Derek was loud that night. Not obnoxious, just the kind of loud that fills a room without trying. He had a story for everyone. He remembered names. He tipped well. He danced badly and didn't care. And I thought that confidence was the most attractive thing I had seen in a long time. We dated for 2 years. Married on a Saturday in June at a venue in Piedmont Park. White chairs on the grass, her mother crying in the front row. His mother already giving speeches at the reception like she had written them months in advance. The first 3 years were good. Genuinely good. We cooked on Sunday mornings. We argued about small things and resolved them the same night. He came to my work events and stood next to me like he was proud. I don't know exactly when that changed. It wasn't a single moment. It was more like a tide going out so gradual. You don't notice until you're standing on dry sand, wondering where the water went. By year 5, he stopped coming to my events. By year 7, he stopped asking about my work at all. By year 8, I realized he had constructed an entire internal narrative in which I was a supporting character in his story, useful present, but not the point. I handled the finances at home because I was good with numbers. I networked because I was social. I built things because that's what I did. None of it in his version was ambition. It was just maintenance. I didn't confront that narrative. I did something quieter. I started signing more documents as M. Hines. I want to be precise about something. I was never planning revenge. That word implies emotion-driving strategy, and what I was doing was not emotional. It was accurate. I was a woman with a financial skill set, a long investment horizon, and a marriage that was slowly teaching me not to expect reciprocity. So I stopped waiting for reciprocity and started building infrastructure instead. The morning of my 38th birthday, Derek was already dressed when I came downstairs. Suit good watched the gray one I'd given him 2 Christmases ago. He kissed me on the cheek and said the reservation was at 7:30. "Who's coming?" I asked. "Just some people," he said. He was already looking at his phone. I should have known then. Derek said, "Just some people," the way other men say, "It's nothing," which always means it's something. I wore the burgundy dress. Understated. I did my own hair. I drove myself because Derek said he had to go early to handle something. I found out later he'd driven Sienna to the restaurant and walked her in through the side entrance 20 minutes before the rest of us arrived. I didn't know that yet when I sat down. I was still at that point a woman having birthday dinner. Still the wife. Still expecting in some residual hopeful corner of myself that the evening might be something worth remembering for the right reasons. It was worth remembering, just not for the reasons I'd hoped. The table was round, which meant no one had their back to anyone. 11 people, including me. Derek sat directly across. He was already 2 drinks in, and holding court telling a story about a job site in Decatur, something about a subcontractor, and a delivery that arrived 3 days late. And everyone was laughing at the rhythm of it, the way they always laughed at Derek's stories because he told them well. Then someone asked. Gerald, Derek's college roommate, leaning forward with his fork halfway to his mouth. "Madelyn, what are you working on these days?" Derek never really talks about your work. The table went quiet in that specific way tables go quiet when a question accidentally exposes something true. Derek answered before I could open my mouth. "Madelyn keeps us organized." He smiled when he said it. Easy, practiced, like he'd said it before. "She handles the bills, manages the household. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without someone keeping the lights on." He laughed. 4 people laughed with him. I looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at his fork. I cut into my salmon, and I started counting. The receipt was a 4.2-inch slip of thermal paper from a restaurant called Emilia's on the west side of Atlanta. I found it on a Thursday morning in early November, 3 weeks after my birthday dinner. I wasn't looking for anything. I was moving Derek's charcoal gray vest from the back seat of my car to the dry cleaning pile in the laundry room. He'd left it there after a weekend trip to Birmingham. He said was for a site inspection, and it fell out of the inside breast pocket and landed face up on the floor tiles. I picked it up because that's what you do when something falls. Emilia's Kitchen. Table 7. October 19th. 2 entrees. 1 bottle of Mayomi Pinot Noir. A shared dessert, the warm butter cake, which I happened to know cost $14 and came with 2 spoons because I'd eaten it there myself, once at a lunch with a colleague 3 years prior. October 19th was a Wednesday. On October 19th, Derek had texted me at 6:48 p.m. running late. "Partner dinner. Don't wait up." I stood in the laundry room for a long time. Not because I was shocked, I want to be honest about that. The shock had already happened somewhere earlier, in some quieter moment I hadn't fully named yet, a moment when his phone screen had tilted away from me at an angle that was 2 degrees too deliberate, or when he'd started showering immediately after coming home on nights he used to sit in his clothes for an hour watching SportsCenter. The body registers things before the mind is willing to. What I felt standing on those tiles was not shock. It was clarity. The particular kind of clarity that arrives when a thing you have been carefully not looking at finally steps directly into the light, and you realize you have been organizing your entire life around not seeing it. I set the receipt on the counter next to the dry cleaning pile, smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, read it again. The timestamp at the bottom said 9:23 p.m. They had stayed through dessert. They had not been in a hurry. I thought about Sienna. She had been in Derek's orbit for about 14 months by that point, introduced at an industry mixer in September of the prior year, as the new marketing director at a firm that did branding work for 2 of Derek's contractors. I had met her twice. She was 29, easy to talk to, the kind of beautiful that announces itself without apology. I had not thought much of her specifically. I had not let myself. Now, I let myself. I opened my laptop at the kitchen counter and pulled up Derek's shared calendar. We had set up a shared family calendar in the year 2 of our marriage for logistical reasons, and he had never bothered to remove my access. He had also apparently never considered that I might actually look at it. October 19th, partner dinner Buckhead. He had typed Buckhead. Emilia's is in West Midtown. Those are not the same neighborhood. They are not close to the same neighborhood. I scrolled back, not frantically, methodically, the way I review financial statements, looking for the pattern underneath the line items. And there it was. A quiet, consistent pattern. Wednesday evenings, every 2 to 3 weeks, stretching back 8 months. Always labeled partner dinner or site walkthrough, or once with almost impressive laziness misc. I closed the laptop. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text my sister. I didn't cry in the way people cry in movies, sliding down walls and pressing hands to mouths. I went upstairs, washed my face, changed into workout clothes, and drove to the gym on Piedmont. I ran 4 miles on the treadmill. I came home. I made dinner. Derek arrived at 8:15. He smelled like he had resprayed his cologne sometime in the late afternoon. He kissed me on the cheek, asked what was for dinner, sat down at the kitchen island, and told me a story about a problem on a job site in Marietta. I listened. I asked a follow-up question. I passed him the bread. There are moments in a marriage when you realize you have become a very good actress in a production you did not audition for. I had been performing the role of woman who does not know for long enough that I could sustain it through an entire meal without effort. But something had shifted in me that morning between the laundry room and the gym. I had spent years watching Derek underestimate me. In small ways, the birthday dinner was just the largest and most public of a long series of smaller dismissals. I had absorbed them, adjusted. Told myself it was not worth the conflict. Told myself successful marriages required tolerance and perspective and the long view. The long view. That phrase had a different meaning now. I thought about the shareholder documents. I thought about the 14 signatures. I thought about a conversation I had had 6 weeks prior with a man named Clifton Wallace, a private equity contact I had cultivated over 3 years, who had called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said quietly and without preamble that his firm was looking to acquire a controlling interest in a mid-size Atlanta construction company. And did I happen to know of any that might be receptive? I had told him I would think about it. Sitting across from Derek at our kitchen island that Thursday night, watching him eat the food I'd cooked and listening to him tell a story about a job site he may or may not have been at on Wednesday evening, I thought about it. I thought about it very carefully. Derek refilled his glass and looked up at me. "You're quiet tonight." "Tired," I said. I smiled. "Long day." He nodded and looked back at his plate. He did not ask what kind of long day. He had stopped asking that sometime. She's in year 6. It was fine. I didn't need him to ask. I already knew what I was going to do. Bones Restaurant on Piedmont Road is the kind of place Atlanta's old money and new money agree on without having to discuss it. The ceilings are low, the lighting is amber, the steaks arrive without ceremony because they don't need it. It has been on the same corner since 1979, and it does not try to be anything other than what it is. Derek had chosen it for my birthday because he knew I loved it, which I want to note because it is important. He chose a place that meant something to me for a night that was supposed to mean something to me, and then used it as a stage for something else entirely. We arrived separately as arranged. I found the table already half full. Gerald and his wife, Pamela, Derek's business partner, Rodney, and his girlfriend, two couples from the neighborhood, whose names I knew but whose company I had never sought, and one face I had not expected to see at my birthday dinner. Sienna was seated to Derek's left. She was wearing a deep green dress and a smile that arrived a half-second too quickly when she saw me, the kind of smile that has been rehearsed. I recognized it because I'd been wearing one for 3 weeks. "Madelyn, happy birthday." She stood, briefly touched my arm. Her perfume was something warm and expensive. "Derek talks about you all the time." I said thank you. I sat down. I placed my napkin in my lap. Derek was already at the head of the table's, energy loose, expansive, working the room from a seated position the way he always did when he felt comfortable. He ordered a second round for the table before the first had arrived. He told Rodney a story with his hands. He was performing for someone, and I understood now that the someone was not me. Sienna laughed at everything he said. Not sycophantically, that would have been easier to dismiss. She laughed like someone who genuinely found him funny, which was more difficult to sit across from, because I remembered when I had found him funny in exactly that way, and I knew what that particular light in a woman's eyes meant. The first hour passed, the way those hours pass food, arriving wine being poured, conversations splitting and rejoining across the table. I talked to Pamela about her daughter's college applications. I talked to Rodney's girlfriend about a restaurant that had opened in Summerhill. I was present. I was pleasant. I was, as I had been for 3 weeks, performing a role I had not chosen. Then Gerald asked his question. He had meant it kindly, I'm certain of that. Gerald is a man who asks follow-up questions because he is genuinely interested. And he had noticed, as perceptive people at that table had noticed, that Derek had spoken about himself and his projects for most of the evening, without once directing the conversation toward his wife on her birthday. "Madelyn," Gerald said, setting down his fork, "what are you working on these days? Derek never really talks about your work." The table did what tables do. It paused. Not a full silence. The restaurant noise continued around us. A woman laughed 2 tables over. A server moved past with a tray, but at our table, in our particular bubble of air, 11 people waited. Derek answered. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance at me, didn't offer me the floor for even a half-second. He picked up his wine glass and leaned back in his chair with the ease of a man who had never considered that the question might not be his to answer. "Madelyn keeps us organized." Easy smile, comfortable posture. "She handles the bills, manages the household. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without someone keeping the lights on." He chuckled at the end. A warm, self-deprecating chuckle designed to make it sound like a compliment. 4 people laughed. The 2 neighborhood couples who didn't know me well enough to know better, and Rodney, who should have. Sienna laughed first and longest. She touched Derek's arm when she laughed, a reflex, unthinking, the kind of touch that lives in the muscle memory of people who have been touching each other for a while. She pulled her hand back after 2 seconds. I counted. Gerald looked at his fork. Pamela looked at me. I looked at my salmon. I cut into it cleanly. The knife went through without resistance. I chewed. I swallowed. I reached for my water glass, and I counted. I counted because counting is what I do when I need to stay in my body and out of my head, when the math of a situation is threatening to overwhelm the management of it. 4 laughed. 5 looked away. 1 touched his arm. 34%. That number arrived in my mind with the stillness of something that has been waiting. 34% of Derek's company, acquired over 6 years, through 14 transactions held under a name he had heard me use on documents and never once asked about. 34% that per the shareholder agreement drafted in 2019 and never updated because Derek trusted Trent, and Trent played golf. And golf did not require reading fine print 34% that came with a buyout clause triggered at the holder's discretion. At my discretion. I set my knife down parallel to my fork the way my mother taught me. Gerald recovered himself and steered the conversation elsewhere. Derek ordered another bottle. The table moved on the way tables move on, because most people at most dinners would rather resume than confront. I ate my birthday dinner. The salmon was excellent. The asparagus was slightly overdone. The wine was a 2019 Napa Cabernet that Derek had ordered, without asking if I wanted red, because he had stopped asking those questions somewhere around year 6. And by now, it was just the weather of our life together. Sienna ordered the warm butter cake for the table at the end. "Everyone has to try it," she said. "It's the best thing on the menu." She said it like a woman who had been here before to this specific restaurant at this specific table. I had not brought her here. Derek did not bring clients here. Bones was personal. I watched her slide the dessert to the center of the table. I watched Derek smile at her when she did it. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. At 10:17 p.m., I said I had a headache and needed to get home. I hugged Pamela. I shook Gerald's hand. I thanked Derek for the dinner in a voice that revealed nothing, and I walked out to the valet without looking back. I sat in my car in the Bones parking lot for 4 minutes. Then I drove to the parking garage on Peachtree Street, took the elevator to the 3rd level, sat in the dark with the engine off, and opened my contacts to a name I had not dialed in 8 months. Clifton Wallace. His phone rang twice. Madelyn. Careful, waiting. "It's time," I said. "Let's talk about the construction company." There was a pause, not of surprise, but of the particular quality that belongs to a man who has been waiting for a specific call and has just received it. "I'll have my team send the term sheet by morning," he said. "Thank you, Clifton." I ended the call. Outside, the Atlanta skyline held its light against the dark like it always did, indifferent and gorgeous and entirely unconcerned with what had just happened. Inside one woman's car on the 3rd level of a parking structure on Peachtree Street. I checked the time, 10:47 p.m. Happy birthday, Madelyn. I slept 7 hours that night. I want to say that plainly, because I think it matters not as a detail of personal pride, but as an accurate account of what it feels like when a decision you have been circling for months finally lands. There is a particular quality of rest that comes not from resolution, but from commitment. I had committed. The body, recognizing this, let go. Derek came home at 12:43 a.m. I know the time because the bedroom door opened and the hall light came in at an angle that hit the ceiling, and I looked at the clock the way you do when you're half asleep and registering information without fully waking. He moved quietly, which was either consideration or habit. He was in bed within 10 minutes. I did not move. I kept my breathing even. He was asleep before I was. I lay in the dark, and I did not think about Sienna. I did not think about the butter cake, or the way she had touched his arm, or the 4 people who had laughed at my birthday dinner when my husband reduced me to a utility. I had already spent 3 weeks thinking about those things, turning them over in the specific obsessive way the mind returns to injuries. And I had gotten everything I needed from that process. It was finished. What I thought about instead was a clause on page 31 of a shareholder agreement. The buyout clause was not complicated. It did not need to be. The best financial instruments rarely are. They derive their power not from complexity, but from precision, from the way a single sentence correctly worded can sit dormant for years and then activate cleanly at exactly the moment it is needed. The clause stated that any minority shareholder holding 15% or more of outstanding shares had the right to trigger a forced valuation and subsequent buyout at the most recent independent appraisal value, provided the triggering shareholder notified all parties in writing with 30 days' notice. The most recent independent appraisal had been completed in March of 2019. The company had grown significantly since March of 2019. Trent, who played golf with Derek and had been managing the shareholder structure, had never commissioned a new appraisal because Derek had never asked for one. And Trent's job security depended on Derek's comfort, not on Derek's accuracy. I had commissioned my own appraisal 18 months ago quietly through a firm in Savannah with no Atlanta connections. I had it in a folder in my home office behind a manila envelope labeled 2021 Tax Correspondence, which Derek had never opened because Derek did not go into my office and did not particularly care about tax correspondence. The gap between the 2019 appraisal value and the current actual value of the company was $4.3 million. 34% of $4.3 million is a number I had calculated on a Tuesday afternoon in my car outside a Whole Foods on Ponce de Leon. And I had sat with it long enough that it no longer felt like a number, and it started to feel like a foundation. The morning after my birthday dinner, I was up at 5:50. I showered. I dressed in the gray suit I wore when I needed to feel precise. I made coffee 1 cup black the way I've taken it since I was 26, and I sat at my kitchen counter with my laptop. And I wrote 3 emails before 7 a.m. The first was to my attorney, a woman named Vivienne Park, who had been my personal counsel for 6 years, and who communicated in a particular style I had come to appreciate: thorough, unemotional, and without unnecessary words. I outlined what I needed. She responded within 40 minutes with 3 questions and a timeline. The second email was to my accountant, Marcus Webb, whom I had worked with since the early days of my career and who had countersigned several of the M. Hines transactions over the years. I needed a complete audit trail of every share acquisition, clean and documented, formatted for legal submission. He responded before 8 a.m. with a confirmation and an estimated completion date of 5 business days. The third email was to Clifton Wallace's assistant, confirming our call from the night before and requesting the term sheet be sent to Vivienne's office directly. By 7:43 a.m., I had done everything I needed to do. Derek came downstairs at 8:15 in a white dress shirt and slacks, already on his phone. He poured himself coffee, leaned against the counter, and looked at me with the mild, unfocused affection of a man who has not registered that anything has changed. "You feel better?" he asked. "You seemed off last night." "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." He nodded. He looked back at his phone. "I've got a long day. Might be late." "Okay," I said. He kissed me on the cheek, the same pressure, the same angle as every morning for 9 years, and he left. I listened to his car back out of the driveway. I finished my coffee. There is a thing that happens when you are building something quietly that other people do not know you are building. The world continues its surface. People say good morning, traffic moves, coffee gets made, and underneath that surface, you are laying infrastructure that will change everything. And no one can see it yet. And you carry that knowledge with a stillness that can look from the outside like calm. I was not calm. I was focused. Those are different things. Over the following 2 weeks, I met with Vivienne twice, both times at her office in Midtown. During lunch hours, I had blocked on my calendar as personal appointment. We reviewed the shareholder agreement line by line. We identified every procedural requirement. We mapped the timeline from initial notification to completion. Vivienne did not ask me how I was feeling about the personal dimensions of the situation. I did not offer that information. We were there to discuss a legal and financial strategy, and that was what we discussed. On a Wednesday afternoon, 11 days after my birthday, I sat across from Vivienne in her conference room on the 14th floor and she slid a single sheet of paper across the table. "This is the formal notification letter," she said. "When you sign it, we file it with the registered agent and deliver copies to all board members and shareholders. The 30-day clock starts the following business day." I read it once. It was clean, precise, exactly what was needed. I picked up the pen. I signed it as M. Hines. Vivienne took the document back without comment. She slid it into a manila folder. She capped her pen and looked at me across the table in the measured way that good attorneys look at clients when they want to confirm readiness without applying pressure. "We'll hold filing until you give me the word," she said. "Give me 2 weeks," I said. She nodded. I wanted 2 weeks, not because I had any doubt about the decision. The decision had been made on a laundry room floor in November, and possibly long before that, in the slow accumulation of years of being seen as a function rather than a person. I wanted 2 weeks because I wanted to watch Derek operate in his ordinary life for a little longer, not out of sentimentality, out of clarity. I wanted to be certain I was seeing him accurately, not through the distortion of injury. What I saw in those 2 weeks confirmed everything. He moved through our shared life with the ease of a man who has never considered that the ground beneath him might not be permanent. He talked about a new contract in Savannah at dinner. He complained about a subcontractor. He texted at the kitchen table without looking up. He told me once on a Saturday morning that I seemed distracted. "A lot on my mind," I said. "Work stuff?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. He nodded and went back to his phone. I called Vivienne on a Monday morning, 14 days after I had signed the notification letter. "File it," I said. "Filing today," she said. I thanked her and ended the call and sat at my desk for a moment in the particular stillness that follows an action that cannot be undone. Then I opened my laptop and went back to work. Derek came home that evening with Thai food and a story about a meeting that had gone well. He had no idea the clock had already started. Derek started moving money on a Thursday. I know the exact day because Vivienne called me at 11:22 a.m. with a tone in her voice that was not alarm. Vivienne does not do alarm, but was the particular quality of controlled precision she uses when something requires immediate attention. "He's transferring assets," she said. 3 accounts. 2 of them are joint. I was sitting at my desk at work, a half-eaten salad to my left, and a quarterly projection on my screen that I'd been reviewing for 20 minutes without absorbing a single number. I closed the projection. "How much?" I said. She told me. I wrote the number down on a Post-it note, looked at it for 3 seconds, then folded it in half and placed it under my keyboard. "Can he?" I asked. "Legally, as of this moment, yes," Vivienne said. "The notification letter has been filed, but the 30-day window hasn't closed. He still has operational authority. What he cannot do is transfer or encumber the company shares themselves. Those are governed by the shareholder agreement, not by him unilaterally. But the personal accounts, we can challenge the transfers as dissipation of marital assets in the divorce proceedings. It won't be clean, but we have documentation of everything prior. Marcus has the full audit trail." I looked at the folded Post-it note under my keyboard. "All right," I said. "What do we need to do?" "File the divorce petition today rather than waiting," Vivienne said. "It creates a legal record that establishes the timeline before the transfers. It also triggers automatic temporary restraining orders on further asset movement." "File it," I said. "I'll need your signature on 3 documents by end of business." "Send them." I ended the call. I sat for a moment with my hands flat on the desk the way I sit when I am processing information I need to metabolize before I can act on it. The salad was still to my left. Outside my office window, Midtown Atlanta was conducting its ordinary Thursday business cars on Peachtree. A construction crane moving in slow arcs 3 blocks north. A woman walking a dog on the sidewalk below with the focused determination of someone running slightly late. Ordinary Thursday. I thought about Derek sitting somewhere in this same city at his office on Northside Drive, or in his truck on a job site, or at a lunch table across from someone I was not supposed to know about, moving money that we had built together into accounts that only had one name on them, and I felt something I want to be precise about. Not rage. Rage is consuming, and I did not have time to be consumed. What I felt was a cold, settling confirmation. He was doing exactly what a man does when he has decided a marriage is over, but has not yet told his wife when he is calculating an exit and quietly repositioning assets before the conversation that will make repositioning impossible. The dinner had not been an accident. The dismissal had not been carelessness. Derek had been preparing to leave and had needed me to feel small enough not to fight it. He did not know he was fighting the wrong opponent. I signed Vivian's documents at 3:45 p.m. She filed by 4:30. The temporary restraining order on further asset transfers was in place before Derek sat down to dinner. What Derek did at dinner that night, I learned later from a source I will not name, except to say that Rodney's girlfriend has very little loyalty to people who have excluded her from the inner circle. Derek had Sienna over to the house. Our house. The house with the sub-zero refrigerator I had selected, and the kitchen island I had paid for out of my own account, because Derek had said that month was tight, and I had not argued, because it was easier not to argue. Sienna had made pasta. She had used my Le Creuset. I did not learn this until 2 days later, and I want to be clear that by the time I learned it, the restraining order was already filed, and the divorce petition was already moving, and what I felt upon hearing it was not additional injury, but rather the particular sensation of a decision being retroactively confirmed as correct. Sometimes the universe offers you information after the fact, not to wound you further, but to make sure you do not second-guess yourself. I did not second-guess myself. What Derek did next was worse than the money and worse than Sienna in my kitchen. He called his mother. Eleanor Carter is a woman of considerable social reach within Atlanta's Black professional community church board sorority connections. 2 decades of carefully maintained relationships with people who mattered in this city. She and I had a relationship that was cordial and effortful in the particular way that relationships with mothers-in-law can be when the mother-in-law has never fully relinquished her son. She called me sweetheart, in a tone that always contained a very small amount of condescension, and I'd absorbed it for 9 years because Derek was her son, and I understood what that meant. Derek called Eleanor and told her the marriage was ending because Madelyn had checked out emotionally, and he had been trying to hold things together for 2 years. Eleanor called 4 people. Those 4 people called others. By the following weekend, the version of events circulating in the part of Atlanta that Derek and I inhabited was that Madelyn Carter had withdrawn from her marriage, had become difficult, and that Derek, patient, warm, community-minded Derek, had done his best. I heard this version from Pamela, who called me on a Sunday morning with the careful tone of a woman delivering intelligence she knows will not be welcome. "I just thought you should know what's being said," Pamela told me. "I appreciate it," I said. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. And I meant it in the specific way I'd been meaning it for weeks, not as reassurance, but as fact. I was better than all right. I was almost finished. Derek, meanwhile, had begun telling Rodney that he was planning to buy out the other shareholders and take the company fully private within the year. He wanted full control, full ownership, a clean structure. He had talked to a lender. He had run numbers. He was, according to Rodney's account via Rodney's girlfriend via Pamela, excited about the next chapter. He had not yet received the formal shareholder notification. That notification, the one Vivian had filed 3 weeks prior, delivered via registered mail to the company's registered agent, and to each board member individually, had been sitting in a stack of mail on Trent's desk, because Trent sorted Derek's business correspondence in order of what he perceived as urgency. And a letter from a law firm he did not recognize regarding a shareholder named M. Hines had not apparently struck him as urgent. Trent would later have significant regrets about this. I knew the letter had not yet reached Derek because Vivian had a read receipt on the registered mail, and because Derek's behavior during this period was not the behavior of a man who had received news that restructured his understanding of his situation. He was too comfortable. He was planning a future that assumed a set of circumstances that were about to change significantly. I watched him operate in this comfort from the particular distance of a woman who had already made all her moves and was now simply waiting for the board to catch up. He texted me twice during this period. Both texts were logistical, one about a bill that needed to be paid, one about a delivery expected at the house. I responded to both. I paid the bill. I signed for the delivery. I was still on the surface, the woman who handled these things. Underneath that surface, the 30-day clock was at 22 days. And somewhere on Trent's desk, beneath a trade publication and a vendor invoice, a letter was waiting. It found him on a Tuesday. I know because Vivian called me at 6:47 a.m. on a Wednesday and said in her precise, unemotional way, "He knows." I was already dressed, coffee in hand, gray suit. "How did he respond?" I asked. "His attorney called our office at 11 p.m. last night," Vivian said. "They used the word mistake. They suggested there had been a clerical error in the shareholder records. They asked if there was room for a conversation before this went further." I looked out my kitchen window. The October light was doing its amber thing again, low and golden through the neighbor's oak tree. "There is no clerical error," I said. "That's what I told them," Vivian said. "And the meeting?" I asked. "They've requested a formal shareholder meeting. Per the agreement, it's within their rights to request one within the 30-day window. We've agreed to a date." She gave me the date. She gave me the address. Tang 22. A building on Peachtree Center Avenue. 10 days out. "I'll be there," I said. "I know," Vivian said. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the cup. I placed it on the drying rack in the precise way I have placed cups on drying racks for 20 years, one of 10,000 small domestic habits that accumulate into a life. Then I picked up my bag and went to work. 10 days. The term sheet from Clifton Wallace arrived on a Wednesday morning in a sealed envelope delivered by a courier to Vivian's office on the 14th floor of her Midtown building. Vivian called me at 9:03 a.m. "It's here," she said. "And Madelyn, it's a strong offer." I was in my car in the parking structure beneath my office building engine, still running coffee in the cup holder. I had been sitting there for 4 minutes, doing the specific kind of stillness I do before a day that requires full capacity. "Send it to my personal email," I said. "I'll review it tonight." "There's one element I want to flag before you read it on your own," Vivian said. "Tell me." "Clifton's firm isn't just acquiring your 34%. They want a controlling interest, minimum 51%, which means they need Derek's shares, or a portion of them, in addition to yours." I had anticipated this. A private equity firm acquiring a minority stake in a construction company without operational control was not the kind of transaction Clifton Wallace built his career on. He was a control buyer. He always had been. "And how do they intend to acquire Derek's shares?" I asked. "That's the part you need to read carefully," Vivian said. "They're proposing a structure in which your buyout triggers first using the 2019 appraisal value per the shareholder agreement. Once that transaction closes and Derek's effective ownership is recalculated against the new cap table, Clifton's firm makes a secondary offer to Derek directly. A market rate offer based on current valuation. I was quiet for a moment. So Derek gets paid market rate, I said. On his remaining shares, yes. And I get the 2019 rate. On your 34%. Per the clause you signed and he countersigned in 2019. I did the math. I had done this math before on a Tuesday afternoon outside a Whole Foods 18 months ago, but I did it again now, because precision matters and memory is not the same as verification. The 2019 appraisal had valued the company at $18.4 million. 34% of $18.4 million was $6.256 million. The current market valuation per the independent appraisal I had commissioned from the firm in Savannah was $26.7 million. 34% of $26.7 million was $9.078 million. The gap between what I would receive and what I would have received at market rate was $2.822 million. I sat with that number for exactly the amount of time it deserved, which was not long. The clause was in the agreement Derek signed, I said. Both directions. If he had triggered it against me, I would have received the 2019 rate. I'm triggering it against him, and I receive the 2019 rate. The clause doesn't discriminate. Correct, Vivian said. And what does Derek receive on his remaining shares from Clifton's secondary offer? Vivian gave me the number. It was fair. It was honest. It was market rate, which is more than the 2019 clause required. Clifton was not trying to destroy Derek. Destroying Derek was not the point, and had never been the point. The point was a clean exit from a company I had helped fund and build for 9 years, executed precisely and legally at a moment of my choosing, rather than his. I'll read the term sheet tonight, I said. But tell Clifton we're moving forward. I'll let him know, Vivian said. I ended the call. I picked up my coffee. It had gone slightly cold. I drank it anyway. There is a thing that happens when a secret you have been carrying for a long time begins to surface. Not a private, emotional secret, but a structural one. The kind embedded in documents and accounts and legal agreements. And that thing is that the people adjacent to the situation begin to feel its gravity before they can name it. Something shifts in the air. Conversations get slightly more careful. People who were comfortable become less so, without knowing why. I watched this happen to Derek in the 8 days between Trent opening the letter and the shareholder meeting. He called me twice on the day after he received the notification. The first call came at 7:14 a.m. I was in a meeting and let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 3 minutes and 40 seconds of Derek using the word misunderstanding 4 times and the phrase, "We need to talk." Twice his voice carrying the particular register of a man who is not yet panicking but is standing at the edge of it looking down. The second call came at 2:31 p.m. I was not in the meeting. I looked at the screen for 4 rings and then placed the phone face down on my desk and went back to the projection I was reviewing. He did not leave a second voicemail. That evening, he was home when I arrived. This was unusual, and Eric's evenings had been increasingly elsewhere for months, and the unusualness of it told me everything I needed to know about the state of his understanding. He was home because he needed something from me, and what he needed was information, and he could not get information from a woman who was not in the room. He was in the kitchen. He had made an attempt at dinner pasta from a boxed jarred sauce, a salad that was technically a salad. He had set the table. He had poured wine. I set my bag down. I looked at the table. I looked at him. "We should talk," he said. "Okay," I said. I sat down. He sat across from me. He had the look of a man who has spent the day preparing what he is about to say and is now in the moment of delivery realizing the preparation was insufficient. "I got a letter," he said, "from a law firm about the company." "Okay," I said. "It mentions someone named M. Hines as a minority shareholder." He paused. He was watching my face. Do you know anything about that? I looked at him across the table we had shared for 9 years. I looked at the wine he had poured into glasses I had selected from a shop on Amsterdam Avenue in New York, on a trip we had taken in year 3 of our marriage when things were good, and we had walked the city for 2 days. And he had held my hand without thinking about it. M. Hines is my maiden name, I said. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Derek set down his fork. He had not yet eaten anything. You're M. Hines? Yes. You own 34% of my company. Our company, I said. Technically. He stared at me. I watched the sequence move across his face. Disbelief first, then the rapid backward calculation of a man trying to reconstruct a timeline, trying to identify the moment when something he thought he understood revealed itself to be something else entirely. His jaw tightened. His hands flat on the table pressed slightly into the surface. For how long? He said. It was not quite a question. 6 years, I said. Another silence. 6 years, he repeated. 14 separate transactions, I said. All properly documented, all countersigned by Trent. The mention of Trent's name did something specific to Derek's expression. I watched him understand in real time that the person he had trusted to manage the structure of his company had been through negligence rather than malice. Countersigning documents that transferred partial ownership of that company to his own wife without ever flagging it as something he should know. Trent knew, Derek said. Trent countersigned, I said. Whether he knew who M. Hines was is a question you would need to ask Trent. Derek pushed back from the table. He stood up. He walked to the kitchen window and stood with his back to me, one hand on the counter, looking out at the backyard, in the particular posture of a man whose internal architecture is being rapidly reorganized. I waited. What do you want, Madelyn? He said finally. His voice was controlled, but the control was effortful. I could hear the effort. I want what the shareholder agreement entitles me to, I said. A buyout at the 2019 appraisal rate. He turned around. That's 4 years old. The company is worth twice that now. The clause doesn't specify recency, I said. It specifies the most recent independent appraisal at the time of signing. That was 2019. Madelyn, Derek. I said his name the way you say a name when you are ending a portion of a conversation, not continuing it. There's also a divorce petition. Vivian filed it last week. You should have received service by now. He had. I could see it in the way his shoulders dropped a half-inch, not in defeat, not yet, but in the recognition that the territory had shifted further than he had understood. You've been planning this, he said. I thought about the laundry room. I thought about the thermal paper receipt. I thought about a birthday dinner at a restaurant I had loved, and a woman in a green dress laughing at a joke made at my expense. I've been paying attention, I said. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I left the pasta on the table and the wine in the glasses, and Derek standing in the kitchen of the house we had shared for 9 years, looking like a man who had just learned that the ground he'd been standing on had different owners than he'd assumed. The meeting was in 7 days. He spent those 7 days making calls I already knew about, consulting attorneys. I had already anticipated exploring options that the shareholder agreement had already foreclosed. His attorney called Vivian twice more. The word negotiate appeared in both conversations. Vivian's response was the same each time, delivered in her precise and unemotional way. My client will see you at the meeting. The building on Peachtree Center Avenue has a lobby that does what Atlanta corporate lobbies do. Marble floors, high ceilings, a security desk staffed by 2 men in blazers who check your ID with the particular efficiency of people who have done it 10,000 times and will do it 10,000 more. I arrived at 8:47 a.m. The meeting was at 9:00. I had slept well. I had eaten breakfast, steel-cut oats, black coffee, half a grapefruit at my kitchen counter, while the city was still mostly quiet. I had dressed in the black suit I kept for occasions that required precision over impression-structured wool. Minimal lapel, no jewelry except the small gold studs I had worn since my 20s. I had removed my wedding ring 11 days prior and placed it in the ceramic dish on my dresser where I kept things I was not yet ready to make decisions about. This morning I had picked it up, looked at it for a moment, and placed it in the top drawer. The elevator to the 22nd floor was fast and silent. When the doors opened, I was met by a receptionist who checked my name against a list and then led me down a corridor with floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city and the downtown cluster of towers, the connector highway below the sprawl of Atlanta, extending south in the flat, hazy way it always does in the late fall light. I had been in rooms like this before. I had run meetings in rooms like this before. The geography was familiar. What was not familiar in the specific way unique things are unfamiliar was walking into a conference room as M. Hines. Vivienne was already there. Seated to the right of the head position at a long oval table, her documents organized in the precise way she organizes documents parallel edges, nothing unnecessary. She looked up when I entered and gave me the small, composed nod that was her version of reassurance. 2 board members were present, a man named Charles Okafor, who had been on the company's board since year 3, and a woman named Patricia Lund, who had joined 2 years ago as an independent director. Neither of them had met me as Madelyn Carter Hines. They had received correspondence from M. Hines through Vivienne's office, and had spent the past week, I imagine, doing the particular recalculation that board members do when a shareholder situation arrives unexpectedly on their calendar. Charles looked at me with the careful neutrality of a man who has been in corporate governance long enough to have seen variations of most things. Patricia looked at me with something closer to recognition not of me specifically, but of the category of situation. She had the look of a woman who had been in enough rooms where power moved in directions other people didn't track, and who found that fact interesting rather than alarming. Clifton Wallace's representative, a man named James C.O., mid-40s wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of still that comes from having been in high-stakes rooms for 20 years, sat to the left of center with 2 associates and a leather portfolio he had not yet opened. I sat at the head of the table. Vivienne did not comment on this. She moved her portfolio slightly to accommodate the new positioning. James Sewell looked at me, then at his portfolio, then back at me with an expression of mild recalibration. We waited. At 9:06, the door opened. Derek walked in with his attorney, a man named Philip Gaines, gray-templed and expensive-looking, who had the bearing of someone accustomed to arriving in rooms and reordering them. Behind them came Trent, who looked like a man who had not slept in 4 days and was deeply regretting a series of decisions made over the course of several years on various golf courses. Derek saw me. I watched it happen, the entry, the scan of the room, the seating arrangement, the moment his eyes found me at the head of the table. It was perhaps 2 seconds. His stride did not break. Derek was too practiced for that, but something in his face did the thing that faces do when the mind receives information it was not prepared for, and has to rapidly construct a new model of the situation it is in. He had known I would be here. He had known M. Hines was Madelyn. What he had not known, I think, was what it would look like, the specific physical reality of his wife sitting at the head of a conference table in a black wool suit with her reading glasses on and a legal pad in front of her, in a room that contained his board members and a private equity representative and her attorney, looking at him with an expression that revealed nothing at all. He sat down. Philip Gaines arranged his documents. Trent found a chair near the wall and took it with the energy of a man trying to occupy as little space as possible. Vivienne opened the meeting. She reviewed the procedural requirements, the timeline of the notification, the shareholder agreement, provisions, the relevant clause. She was efficient and thorough and took 11 minutes. No one interrupted. Then Charles Okafor spoke. He addressed the room generally, which was the correct approach. "We've reviewed the notification and the supporting documentation," he said. "The shareholder agreement appears to be clear on the triggering conditions and the buyout mechanics. Philip, your client, has had the opportunity to review the same materials. Is there a substantive challenge to the validity of the trigger?" Philip Gaines leaned forward. "Our position is that the shareholder agreement contains an ambiguity regarding the identity verification process for secondary share acquisitions. We believe the transactions through which M.R. Hines acquired the 34% stake were not properly disclosed under the spirit of the agreement's related party provisions." Vivian did not move. "The related party provision," she said in a tone of complete factual neutrality, "applies to transactions between the company and its executive officers or board members. Ms. Hines, who is neither an executive officer nor a board member of this company, acquired shares through properly documented secondary market transactions countersigned by the company's own CFO. There is no ambiguity." Philip started to respond. "There's also," Vivian continued without raising her voice or accelerating her pace, "the matter of the independent appraisal completed in March of 2019, which serves as the valuation basis for the buyout. That appraisal was commissioned by the company itself, conducted by a certified valuation firm, and accepted by all parties at the time of the shareholder agreement amendment. The 2019 valuation figure is not in dispute." Philip closed the document he had opened. In the silence that followed, James Seo opened his leather portfolio for the first time. I had not spoken yet. I let Vivian work because Vivian was the attorney. And this was her room in the procedural sense, and because there is a specific kind of power and stillness in being the person at the head of the table who has not yet needed to say anything because everything that needed to be said was already documented, already filed, already irrefutable. Derek was looking at the table, not at me, not at Philip. At the table surface in front of him with the expression of a man who is in the process of understanding the full dimensions of a situation that is significantly larger than the dimensions he had been operating with. Charles Okafor looked at Philip Gaines. "Is there a formal challenge your client wishes to submit in writing for the board's consideration?" Philip looked at Derek. Derek looked up from the table. He looked at me. I looked back at him across the oval table in a room on the 22nd floor of a building on Peachtree Center Avenue, with the Atlanta skyline behind me through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I held his gaze with the same stillness I had held on the night of my birthday, when he had told 11 people I was only good for paying bills. He looked away first. "No formal challenge," Philip said. His voice had recalibrated. "Our client would like to understand the full terms of the proposed transaction before the board votes on next steps." James Seo slid the term sheet across the table. I picked up my pen. It was a good pen, a matte black Pilot that cost $4 and wrote cleanly, and was the kind of pen I had used my entire professional life because I had never needed a pen to announce itself. I did not look at Derek when James Seo walked the room through the terms. I did not look at him when Charles Okafor asked the board to vote on proceeding with the buyout trigger. I did not look at him when Patricia Lund, after a pause of perhaps 3 seconds, said "I" in a clear, even voice. I did not look at him when Charles said "I" immediately after. I looked at him when Vivian said, "The board has approved the trigger. The buyout process will proceed per the shareholder agreement timeline." I looked at him because I wanted to see it not out of cruelty, but because I had earned the right to witness the moment clearly, and I was not going to look away from things I had earned. Derek's jaw tightened. His hand flat on the table pressed into the surface the way it had in our kitchen a week prior. The expensive watch caught the light. Philip Gaines was already gathering his documents. Trent, from his chair near the wall, was studying his shoes with the dedication of a man who has decided that shoes are the most interesting thing in any room he will ever enter again. I stood. "Thank you," I said to Charles, to Patricia, to James Sue. I picked up my legal pad. I picked up my $4 pen. I nodded to Vivian, who was already closing her portfolio with the precise efficiency she applied to everything. I walked to the door. At the door, I stopped. Not because I had planned to. I want to be honest about this, because I am trying to give you an accurate account and not a theatrical one. I stopped because something made me stop, some residual thing that 9 years leaves in the body, even after the mind has concluded its business. I turned around. Derek was still at the table. He had not stood. He was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on him before, not anger, not the easy confidence he had worn for years like a second skin. Something rawer. Something that might, in different circumstances and a different story, have moved me. "Madelyn," he said. Just my name, nothing after it. I held his gaze for one moment. "Sit down, Derek," I said quietly. "They're not finished yet." I walked out. The elevator came immediately. The lobby was doing its ordinary marble and security desk business. Outside Peachtree Center Avenue was conducting its Thursday morning in full taxis pedestrians, a food truck setting up on the corner, the city's relentless and indifferent momentum. I stood on the sidewalk for 30 seconds. Then I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. "It's done," I said. She was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of a woman who has been waiting for news and is now receiving it and is making room for it properly. "Come have lunch with me," she said. "Yes," I said. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I flagged a cab. Behind me on the 22nd floor, the meeting was still in session. I did not go back up. The first domino fell on a Friday, not the meeting. The meeting was Thursday, and Thursday ended with Vivian sending me a summary email at 6:14 p.m. that I read over dinner at my mother's kitchen table while she refilled my water glass without asking, and told me about her neighbor's new dog in the specific way mothers tell small stories when they know the large stories have already been handled. And what you need now is ordinary life offered gently. The first domino was Trent. Trent resigned on Friday morning at 8:47 a.m. via a letter to the board that cited personal reasons and a desire to pursue other professional opportunities. Charles Okafor forwarded me the letter as a courtesy per the shareholder communication protocols now in effect. I read it at my desk with my coffee and then filed it in a folder I labeled Post-Meeting Correspondence and went back to my morning. But Trent's resignation was not a contained event. Trent had been Derek's operational anchor for 6 years, the person who knew where the contracts were, who the key subcontractors were, which clients needed managing, and how which outstanding invoices were at risk of dispute. His institutional knowledge was not documented in any way that a replacement could access quickly, because Derek had operated the company on relationships and trust, rather than systems, which works until it doesn't. Trent leaving on a Friday meant Derek spent the weekend without an operational right hand, trying to reconstruct from memory the status of 4 active contracts totaling $61 million in commitments, while simultaneously managing his attorney's calls and his mother's calls. And I was told later 17 attempts to reach Sienna that went unreturned. Sienna had by Friday afternoon stopped answering. I did not know this in real time. I learned it in pieces over the following week through the particular information network that exists in any city among people who know each other well enough to talk Pamela, who heard from Gerald, who heard from Rodney, who was watching Derek's situation with the careful distance of a business partner beginning to calculate his own exposure. Rodney called me on Saturday morning. "Madelyn." His voice was careful. "I just want to check in." "I'm well, Rodney," I said. "Thank you for calling." A pause. How are things with the company situation? Moving forward as planned, I said. Another pause. Rodney was doing the calculation I had expected him to do, the one that every person adjacent to a collapsing structure eventually does. Where do I stand, and what do I need to do to make sure I'm not standing on the part that falls? I've been thinking about the Savannah contract, he said. Rodney held a 15% stake and had been Derek's partner in the early years. The timeline is tight, and with Trent gone. That's a conversation for the board, I said. Charles is the right person to talk to about operational continuity. Right, Rodney said. Right. Another pause. Is there anything you need from me in terms of supporting a smooth transition? I looked out my kitchen window. The oak tree in the neighbor's yard had dropped most of its leaves now, the branches bare and clean against the gray November sky. Keep the Savannah contract on schedule, I said. That's what the company needs right now. Of course, he said. Of course. He hung up before I did. The bank called Derek on Monday. Specifically, the commercial lending division of the regional bank that had been financing Derek's operating line of credit for 4 years, called to request an urgent meeting regarding the company's current shareholder structure and the implications for the loan covenant compliance review scheduled for December. Loan covenants in commercial real estate construction financing are specific and sensitive instruments. They contain provisions that allow lenders to accelerate repayment or freeze credit lines when certain structural changes occur in the borrowing entity, changes in ownership, changes in management, changes in the fundamental composition of the company that the lender had underwritten. A forced shareholder buyout triggering a change in ownership structure, combined with the resignation of the CFO and the pending review of operational contracts, was exactly the kind of event that activated those provisions. Derek met with the bank on Tuesday. I know what happened in that meeting, not because I was there, but because James Seo's firm, as the incoming majority acquirer, was copied on all material communications regarding the company's financial structure, a standard provision of the letter of intent that had been signed the previous week. James's associate sent me a summary at 4:30 p.m. Tuesday afternoon. The bank had frozen the operating line of credit pending the outcome of the shareholder transition. They had not called the loan not yet, but they had restricted Derek's ability to draw new funds against it, which meant 3 subcontractor payments due the following week were now in jeopardy. Subcontractors in commercial construction are not patient creditors. They have their own payrolls, their own material costs, their own lines of credit that depend on timely payment from the general contractor above them. When a GC misses payment, the subcontractors notify their own lenders, and those lenders make calls, and the calls get made to the GC's bank, and the bank's risk assessment of the GC changes. This is the domino structure of construction finance. Derek knew it well. He had explained it to me once early in our marriage over dinner in the way he explained things he understood with confidence and detail. And the pleasure of a man who knows how something works. The irony of this was not lost on me. By Wednesday, 2 of Derek's 4 active contracts had been flagged for review by the project owner's risk management teams. Project owners watch their GC's financial health the way pilots watch instrument panels continuously and without sentiment. When instruments move, they act. Rodney called Charles Okafor on Wednesday afternoon. Charles called Vivian. Vivian called me. "He's trying to negotiate a buyback," she said. "His attorney has proposed that Derek retain his shares in exchange for a cash settlement to your 34% at a negotiated rate above the 2019 appraisal." I was at my desk. I had been in 2 meetings that morning, reviewed a quarterly projection, and eaten lunch, a sandwich from the place on the corner that makes them correctly with the bread toasted and the ratio of filling to bread at the proportion I prefer. "What rate are they proposing?" I asked. Vivian gave me the number. It was above the 2019 appraisal. It was below market. It was the number of a man trying to retain control of something that was already leaving his hands. Tell them the shareholder agreement governs the transaction, I said. The trigger has been activated. The process will proceed as written. Philip Gaines will push back, Vivian said. He can push, I said. She made a sound that in anyone else would have been a laugh. In Vivian, it was a brief, controlled exhale. I'll convey that, she said. Derek came to the house on Thursday evening. He had not been back since the morning I had told him about Monsieur Hines at the kitchen table. He had been staying, I had learned through Pamela via the information network, at a hotel in Buckhead, whose daily rate was the kind of number that depleted personal reserves in a way that compounded an already compounding problem. He rang the bell. I had not expected him to ring the bell of his own house, but I understood why he did. The geometry of the situation had changed, and he was navigating it without a map. I opened the door. He looked different. Not dramatically. Derek had always been a man who maintained his surface presentation under pressure the way men who have built their identity around their appearance in the world tend to do. But there was something in the area around his eyes, a particular quality of sleeplessness, and his jacket was the one he wore when he was not thinking about what he was wearing. "Can I come in?" he said. I stepped back from the door. He came into the hallway. He looked at the house, the way you look at a place that was yours and is now uncertain territory taking inventory. I thought of what remained and what had changed. Nothing had changed. The kitchen was the same, the hallway table was the same, the ceramic dish on the entryway console that I had bought at a market in Savannah still held the same spare keys. He sat at the kitchen island without being invited to, which was either habit or the last reflex of a man in a place he had considered home. "The bank froze the line," he said. "I know," I said. He looked at me. "The Savannah contract is at risk. If we miss the subcontractor payments next week, the owner has grounds to pull the GC designation." "I know," I said again. "Madelyn." He pressed his hands flat on the island. "If that contract falls, it's 60 employees. 60 people who have nothing to do with..." He stopped, recalibrated. With any of this, I was standing on the other side of the island. I had not sat down. I looked at him across the counter where we had eaten breakfast for 9 years. And I thought about 60 employees because they were real, and their payroll was real. And the fact that Derek had created this situation did not make their exposure fictional. "The bank froze the credit line because of the shareholder transition uncertainty," I said. "When the transition completes, the structure becomes clear again. Clear structures reassure lenders." He was listening. "The fastest way through this," I said, "is not negotiation, it's completion. Let the process finish. Let Clifton's firm come in with the capital they're bringing. A private equity-backed GC with a clean ownership structure and fresh capital is a better credit risk than what you have right now." Derek stared at me for a long moment. "And I lose the company," he said. "You lose majority ownership," I said. "Clifton's term sheet includes an operating role for you at a market salary with a performance bonus structure. You know this company better than anyone they could bring in. They need that." He was quiet. "You'd be working for them," he said. "Working for Clifton Wallace's firm." "You'd be working for the company you built," I said. "With resources it's never had." I did not say, "And you would not be working for me." I did not need to say it. We both understood that the alternative, the scenario in which Derek retained control was no longer available, had not been available since October 19th, had possibly not been available for longer than that, since the first time he looked at me across a dinner table and decided I was a utility. He sat at the kitchen island for another few minutes. He looked at the countertop. He looked at his hands. He looked once at the ring I was no longer wearing, and something moved across his face that I did not try to interpret. Then he stood up. "I'll call Philip," he said. "That's the right call," I said. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame, not turning around. Just stopping the way people stop when there is something that needs to occupy a moment, even if there are no words for it. Then he left. I stood in the kitchen for a while after the door closed. The house was quiet in the way houses are quiet when they have held something and then released it. I washed the coffee cup that was still in the dish rack from that morning. I dried it. I put it away. Outside, the oak tree in the neighbor's yard stood bare in the evening dark, clean and patient, and entirely untroubled by winter. By Friday morning, Philip Gaines had called Vivian to confirm that Derek would not contest the remainder of the process. By Friday afternoon, the bank had been notified of the incoming ownership transition and had agreed to hold the credit line review pending completion. By Friday evening, the subcontractor payments were secured through a bridge arrangement James C.O.'s firm had extended as a good faith measure. 60 people kept their jobs. Derek checked out of the Buckhead Hotel and into a smaller place in Midtown. Sienna, as far as anyone in the information network could determine, had stopped being findable, and I went to my mother's house for dinner, where she had made her slow-cooked short ribs that take 4 hours and smell like Sunday mornings when I was 12. And we sat at her kitchen table, and she asked me how I was feeling, and I told her the truth. "Like someone who did what needed to be done," I said. She nodded. She passed the bread. "That's enough," she said. "That's exactly enough." The word spread the way words spread in Atlanta, not all at once, but in concentric circles moving outward from the center of the event, through the people closest to it. Then to the people 1 degree removed, and then to the broader community that occupies the same professional and social geography, until eventually what happened in a conference room on the 22nd floor of a building on Peachtree Center Avenue became the kind of story people reference at dinner parties, without always knowing the full facts, but knowing enough of the shape of it to repeat it. The shape of it was this. Derek Carter had publicly dismissed his wife at her own birthday dinner, and his wife had turned out to own 1/3 of his company. And within 30 days of that dinner, his CFO had resigned, his bank had frozen his credit line, his girlfriend had disappeared, and a private equity firm was now the majority owner of the construction company he had spent 11 years building. That was the shape. The details varied depending on who was telling it. I heard versions of it 3 times in the first 2 weeks after the meeting, once from Pamela, who relayed it with the careful neutrality of a woman reporting news rather than opinion. Once from a colleague at work who did not know it was about me and told it as an interesting piece of Atlanta business gossip while we were waiting for a conference call to start. And once from a woman at my gym who had been at a dinner party the prior weekend and offered it as evidence of the general principle that people who underestimate their spouses tend to eventually receive a comprehensive education on the subject. I listened to all 3 versions, without correcting the details that were wrong, and without confirming the details that were right. It was not my story to distribute. It had happened to me, but that did not mean it belonged to me, in the way that required management. It was simply a thing that had occurred, and it was occurring now in the world, the way all true things eventually do, spreading outward, becoming part of the shared record of a city and a community, and a moment in time. Eleanor Carter called me on a Wednesday. I had been expecting this call for 2 weeks. Eleanor did not call quickly. She was a woman who processed before she acted, who gathered information from multiple sources before committing to a position. This was the quality that had made her effective on the boards she sat on and the committees she chaired, and it was the same quality that meant when she did act, she had already decided. I answered on the 3rd ring. "Madelyn," she said. "Eleanor," I said. A pause. The quality of it was different from Derek's pauses, less the pause of a man recalibrating, and more the pause of a woman choosing language. "I owe you an apology," she said. I had not expected this. Eleanor Carter did not often arrive at apology as her first move. I gave her the silence she needed to continue. I said things to people, she said. After Derek told me the marriage was ending, I repeated things that were not accurate and not kind. Another pause. I knew you for 9 years, Madelyn. I should have called you before I called anyone else. Yes, I said. You should have. I did not soften it. Eleanor was a woman who respected directness and would not have trusted a response that cost nothing. She was quiet for a moment. How are you? She said finally. I'm well, I said. Genuinely. Derek is... She stopped, started again. He's having a hard time. I know, I said. I don't think he understood what he had. She said it carefully, in the way mothers say true things about their children that cost them something. No, I said. He didn't. We were quiet together for a moment, in the specific way two women can be quiet on a phone call when there's nothing left that needs to be said, but neither is quite ready to end the conversation. Take care of yourself, Eleanor, I said finally. You too, sweetheart, she said. She said it the same way she had always said it, with that small residual amount of condescension, the sweetheart of a woman who had always seen me as secondary. But this time, there was something else underneath it. Something that might have been recognition. I let it go. Rodney called me the following week about the Savannah contract. The contract had been secured. The subcontractor payments had gone out on time once James C.O.'s bridge arrangement had cleared. The project owner's risk management team had conducted their review and been satisfied by the new ownership structure. A private equity-backed GC with clean documentation and fresh capital was, as I had told Derek, a better credit risk than what had existed before. Rodney was calling to tell me this, but he was also calling because Rodney was a man who tracked the direction of power with the accuracy of someone who had learned early in life that being on the right side of the ledger saw mattered. I wanted to say, he said after the contract update, that I think the transition has been handled professionally. You've handled it professionally. Thank you, Rodney, I said. If there's anything I can do to support the incoming leadership team, he said, I want you to know I'm available. I'll pass that along to James C.O.'s team, I said. Yes, he said. Good. That's yes. A pause. And Madelyn, for what it's worth, what Derek said at that dinner was wrong. It was wrong. And I should have said something at the time, and I didn't. And I've thought about that. I considered his words. Rodney had known Derek for 12 years. He had been at the birthday dinner. He had laughed. I appreciate you saying so, I said. I did not say more than that. Some acknowledgments are worth receiving and not worth elaborating on. After I hung up, I sat at my desk for a moment and thought about the birthday dinner, the round table, the amber lighting the salmon, the 4 people who laughed. I thought about Rodney in particular, and about the specific shape of the laugh he had given, quick, reflexive, the laugh of a man who laughed because laughing was easier than not laughing in that moment, and who had spent the subsequent weeks understanding what that laugh had cost him in his own estimation of himself. I did not need his contrition, but I filed it the way I file things that are accurate and worth knowing. The divorce proceedings moved at the particular pace of legal processes that are not being contested deliberately, procedurally, with a great deal of paper and very few surprises. Derek had retained a new attorney after Philip Gaines had stepped back, a woman named Cheryl Odom, who had a reputation for mediated settlements, and who communicated with Vivian in the direct, efficient way that 2 experienced attorneys communicate when both sides have decided that drawn-out conflict serves no one. The marital asset division was straightforward in the way that things are straightforward when one party has significantly more documentation than the other. Vivian had 9 years of financial records organized with the precision of a woman who had never trusted that the marriage would be permanent and had kept records accordingly. Not out of suspicion, she would have said. Out of habit. Out of the professional disposition of a woman who knew that documentation was not pessimism, it was respect for the future. The house went to me. I had made the down payment from my personal account. The title had always been in both names, but the financial record was clear. Derek retained the salary and performance structure that Clifton's firm had offered him in the term sheet. He was by all accounts a competent construction operator. And James C.O.'s team had confirmed within 2 weeks of the transition that he was worth keeping in an operational role. He knew the subcontractors. He knew the clients. He knew the job sites. What he no longer knew was the cap table, the financial structure, the ownership. He knew how to build things. He just didn't own them anymore. Sienna resurfaced 6 weeks after the meeting. Not to me, I had no reason to hear from Sienna, and she had no reason to contact me, and to her credit, she didn't. She resurfaced in the social landscape of Atlanta, which is a city large enough to give people space and small enough to make disappearance temporary. She had taken a position at a firm in Midtown. She had, according to the information network, ended things with Derek formally rather than simply going silent. A phone call, apparently, in which she had said something that Pamela relayed to me as, she told him she wasn't built for someone else's consequences. I found this accurate and fair, and did not feel about it one way or the other. Sienna was 29. She had made a choice and then unmade it when the geometry changed. This was human, and I had no quarrel with it. What I felt in the weeks after the meeting and the divorce proceedings and the ripple of consequences that moved outward from that birthday dinner in October, what I felt was not triumph exactly, and not relief exactly. It was something quieter than either of those. It was the feeling of having been seen accurately at last. Not by Derek, who still did not fully see me, and might not ever, and with whom I had made my peace in the specific way you make peace, with a thing that is true, but no longer urgent. Not by the 4 people at the birthday dinner who had laughed, some of whom had since sent me messages of various shapes that I had read and filed and not answered. Seen by myself. The version of me that had been signing documents as M. Hines for 6 years, that had been paying attention, when no one thought she was paying attention, that had sat at a birthday dinner and been reduced to a function, and had driven home and called Clifton Wallace at 10:47 p.m. Not out of rage, but out of a clarity so precise it felt like coming home to herself. That version of me had always been there. She had just been waiting for the right moment to stand up and take her seat at the head of the table. One morning in early December, 6 weeks after the meeting, I was at my kitchen counter with my coffee when my phone buzzed with a notification from Marcus Webb. The buyout had cleared. $6.256 million transferred to my personal investment account, per the shareholder agreement, per the 2019 appraisal, per a clause that Derek Carter had signed and never read carefully enough, and now never would. I looked at the notification for a moment. Then I put my phone face down on the counter, finished my coffee, rinsed my cup, and placed it on the drying rack in the precise way I had placed cups on drying racks my entire adult life. I had a 9 a.m. meeting. I was not going to be late. 6 months after the birthday dinner at Bones Restaurant, I signed my name to a document that had only one name on it. Not M. Hines. Not Madelyn Carter. Not Madelyn Carter Hines, the hyphenated construction of a woman who had spent 9 years building a life inside someone else's narrative. Madelyn Hines. Clean, whole. The name I'd been born with and had never stopped carrying, even when I had layered other names on top of it, the way you layer clothing in, whether you aren't sure about. The document was a certificate of incorporation for a company called Hines Capital Partners, LLC. Registered in the state of Georgia, headquartered at an address on West Peachtree Street in Midtown Atlanta with one founding member and one ADITSA mission to acquire, develop, and manage equity positions in high-growth companies across the Southeast, with a particular focus on construction, infrastructure, and real estate development. Vivian witnessed the signing. She handed me the pen with her usual economy of motion and expression, but when I set the pen down, she did something I had not seen her do in 6 years of professional relationship. She smiled. Not the controlled professional acknowledgement she offered at the end of successful proceedings. A real smile, the kind that arrives without being managed. "Congratulations, Madelyn," she said. "Thank you, Vivian," I said, "for everything." She waved this off in the way she waves off sentiment, not unkindly, but efficiently. There was a stack of documents on the table, and we were both women who respected what came next. We got back to work. The Series B meeting was on a Thursday morning in April. The conference room was on the 15th floor of a building 3 blocks from the one where I had sat across from Derek 6 months prior. Different building, different table, different configuration of power, but the same city, the same light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the same Atlanta sprawl extending southward below. I had been in this room before in a different capacity as the CFO of a company someone else had founded, as the financial architect of a structure someone else had put their name on. I knew the room. I knew the language of the room, the rhythm of a capital raise, the particular texture of the silence that precedes a term sheet being slid across a table. What was different this morning was the nameplate at the head of the table. Hines Capital Partners, my name, on a placard, at the head of the room. I had placed it there myself 20 minutes before anyone else arrived, and I had stood and looked at it for exactly as long as it took to confirm that it was straight. Then I had arranged my documents and poured myself coffee from the carafe on the credenza and sat down to review my notes. The founding team of the startup, a construction tech company developing AI-assisted project management software for mid-sized GCs, arrived at 9:02. 3 founders, mid-30s, 2 men and a woman, all carrying the particular energy of people who have been building something for 2 years and are finally in a room where the right kind of capital might be available. I had reviewed their financials for 3 weeks. I had spoken to 4 of their customers. I had had Vivian review their corporate structure and Marcus Webb review their unit economics. I had done what I'd always done. Paid attention, kept records, moved carefully and with precision toward a decision I had already made and was now ready to execute. The lead founder, a man named Andre, 36, who had spent 8 years as a project engineer before founding the company, opened the presentation without preamble. He was good. Clear, specific, unafraid of the hard questions that he knew were coming and came anyway. The presentation took 40 minutes. I asked 11 questions. Not 12, not 9/11. Because that was how many I needed, and I had learned over the course of a career that the quality of questions matters more than the quantity, and that the ability to ask the right 11 questions in a 40-minute meeting is a skill that does not announce itself, but is consistently the thing that separates good capital allocators from ones who simply have capital. After the 11th question, Andre looked at me across the table with the expression of a founder who has been asked hard questions before and has not always been able to answer them well, and has just realized he has answered all 11 of them and is not certain what that means yet. "Is there anything you want to add?" I said, "that I haven't asked about?" He thought for a moment. "Our burn rate is going to increase in Q3, he said. "We're hiring 3 engineers. I'd rather you hear that from me than find it in the model." I looked at him for a moment. "That's the right instinct," I said. "Tell me about the engineers." He told me. The details were specific, the hires were defensible, the reasoning was sound. The woman co-founder, who had been quiet through most of the presentation, in the way that sometimes means a person is decorative and sometimes means they are watching everything, spoke for the first time about the product roadmap. She was the sharpest person in the room. I made a note. At the end of the meeting, I walked Andre and his team to the elevator. In the hallway, he shook my hand and said with the careful directness of a man who wanted to ask something without seeming presumptuous, "Where did you develop your construction industry focus?" I considered the question. "I've been studying it for a long time," I said, "from multiple angles." He nodded, accepting this as the complete answer it was. The elevator came. They stepped in. I walked back to the conference room. Vivienne was still at the table organizing the documents we had reviewed. She looked up. "Well," she said. "We're investing," I said. She made a note. "I want to tell you something about the months between October and April, between the birthday dinner and the Series B meeting, between the woman who sat at a round table in Bones' restaurant, counting the people who laughed, and the woman who walked into a conference room with her name on the placard at the head. They were not dramatic months in the way that the word dramatic implies visible external turbulence. The legal proceedings moved at legal pace. The financial transactions cleared in their proper sequence. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday afternoon in February, with less ceremony than a trip to the grocery store. 2 attorneys in a room, a judge on a video screen, a signature, and then the particular quiet of a thing completed. I drove home from Vivienne's office that Tuesday and stopped at the Whole Foods on Ponce de Leon, the same one where I had once sat in the parking lot calculating the value of 34% and bought groceries for the week. Salmon, asparagus, a bottle of wine I had been thinking about trying. I cooked dinner. I ate it at my kitchen counter with a book open beside me. I went to bed at a reasonable hour. I slept well. The months between October and April were months of building. Not dramatic building, not the kind that generates noise or requires an audience. The quiet kind. The kind that happens in the early mornings at a kitchen counter and in lunch meetings and in the careful review of financial documents and in 11 questions asked across a conference table on a Thursday in April. I started running again, not because of any weight-related aspiration or fitness goal, but because I had always been a runner and had stopped sometime in year 7 of the marriage, when the habits that were mine had slowly been compressed by the habits of a shared life that was becoming increasingly unshared in all the ways that mattered. I ran 4 miles every other morning before work. I ran on Piedmont, sometimes along the belt line, sometimes through the neighborhood with the oak trees that went bare in November and would come back in spring, which they were doing now. Small green things appearing on branches that had looked finished, the specific proof that bare is not the same as dead. I called my mother more, not because crisis had reminded me to, but because I had more space now. More quiet in the evenings, more room in the calendar for the things I had been letting compress. I had dinner with Pamela twice, without Gerald, just the 2 of us, at a restaurant in Inman Park, where the tables are small and the lighting is honest and you can actually hear each other talk. We did not spend those dinners discussing Derek or the events of the previous months. We talked about her daughter's college choice and a trip Pamela was planning, and a book we had both read and disagreed about in the productive way that conversations with intelligent people can go, when there is no one at the table performing for anyone. I realized somewhere in March, stopped performing. Not in the professional sense in meetings and negotiations. I was as precise and deliberate as I had always been. But in the texture of my daily life, in the evenings and the weekends, and the small moments that accumulate into who a person actually is when no one is assigning them a role. I had stopped calibrating myself to someone else's narrative. I did not know exactly when I had started. I knew exactly when I had stopped. On an evening in early April, the week before the Series B meeting, I was at my kitchen counter with a glass of the wine I had bought at Whole Foods in February. It was as good as I had hoped, and my laptop open to a document I had been working on, and the kitchen was quiet, the way the kitchen is quiet when the house is yours. And you have made peace with the quiet when the quiet is not absence, but simply the sound of your own life, being lived at your own pace. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I did not recognize. I heard about the new firm. Congratulations. You always were the smartest person in the room. I read it once. I set the phone face down on the counter. I picked up my wine. Outside, the April evening was doing what Atlanta April evenings do, warm and green, and full of the particular optimism of a city that does not do winter for long, and comes back from it fast and without apology. I did not respond to the text, not because I was still angry. The anger had done its work and been released the way useful things are released when they've served their purpose. Not because I wanted to wound him with silence. Silence was not a weapon I was wielding. I simply had nothing to say that needed saying. And I had learned in 9 years of marriage and 6 years of signing documents as M. Hines, and 1 birthday dinner and 1 phone call at 10:47 p.m. in Sasund, in a parking garage on Peachtree, I had learned that the most powerful thing a woman can do is act when action is required and be still when stillness is what the moment calls for. The moment called for stillness. I finished my wine. I went back to my document. On the nameplate in the conference room, 3 blocks away, in a building that would be mine for another 6 months before I moved to a larger space, my name sat straight and clean in the dark Hines Capital Partners. No other name, no hyphen, no layer of someone else's story on top of mine. Just the name I was born with and the company I had built and the morning that was coming and all the work still left to do. That was enough. That was, as my mother would say, exactly enough. There is a version of this story where I tell you that everything I did was about revenge. That the shareholder documents were a trap. I said that the phone call at 10:47 p.m. was the opening move of a calculated dismantling, that I sat at that birthday dinner and smiled because I knew what was coming. That version is cleaner. It is more satisfying in the way that stories with a clear villain and a clear avenger are satisfying. But it is not the true version. The true version is this. I was a woman who paid attention when no one thought she was paying attention. I was a woman who kept building when the person who was supposed to see her had stopped looking. I was a woman who had learned slowly over years through the accumulation of small dismissals and compressed habits and birthday dinners at round tables that the most dangerous thing you can do is organize your life around someone else's valuation of you. Because people's valuations change, or they don't change when they should, or they were never accurate to begin with, and you adjusted yourself to fit their inaccuracy, and one day you are sitting at a table in a restaurant you love on your 38th birthday, and someone is telling 11 people that your entire value is the bills you pay, and you realize that you have been living inside a story that was never really about you. That is the moment. Not the phone call, not the meeting on the 22nd floor. The moment is the realization that you have been waiting for someone else's permission to be the full version of yourself. And the permission was never coming, and it was never required. You already had everything you needed. You always did. If you were in a room right now where someone is narrating your value for you at a dinner table, in a meeting, in a relationship, in any space where another person's version of who you are has started to feel more real than your own, I want you to hear this. They are working with incomplete information. They do not have access to the documents. They do not know what you have been signing quietly in your own name in the years when no one was watching. Keep signing. Keep building. The meeting will happen when it is time. And when you walk into that room, sit at the head of the table. Not because you need to prove something to the person who underestimated you, but because it is where you were always supposed to be. Subscribe if this story found you when you needed it. And leave me a comment. I want to know, what is the one thing you have been building quietly that no one around you knows about yet? Tell me. I will read every single one.